Welcome, everyone. We have much to discuss, so please settle in. Before we delve into our main topic, let's make sure our data feeds are stable. A device wobbled in the speaker's upper limbs, screen luminescent against the dim lighting of the briefing chamber. Their breathing apparatus hissed in short bursts, betraying intense nerves. I'm not convinced these numbers are correct, they admitted, voice quivering. A cluster of figures gathered around, all wearing expressions of growing concern. We've run the calculations multiple times, another insisted, adjusting a bright insignia pinned to their robe. The results keep coming back the same, no matter how we parse the data. A tense hush fell over the small group who were huddled away from the main assembly hall. Through a wide, transparent partition, it was clear that thousands of beings, some in pressurized suits, others in vaporous enclosures, were settling into seats. Whispers and flickers of luminescent signals suggested a collective anticipation for the upcoming presentation. The cramped preparation alcove smelled of stale recirculated oxygen and the remnants of an unusual beverage that no one dared finish. A tonal alert chimed. 5 minutes remained until showtime. One of the researchers leaned close to the lead presenter. We could hold off, they suggested quietly. Request a delay. Gather more evidence. No, the chief speaker replied, attempting to steady trembling limbs. We're out of time. The entire forum has arrived to hear these findings. If our conclusions are right, they paused, swallowing a lump in their throat. This changes everything. Stepping through the doors and onto the broad stage, the lead presenter found themselves bathed in a spotlight. The main hall spread out like a colossal amphitheater, filled with beings of every conceivable body type, serpentine forms coiled in watery spheres, crystalline shapes pulsing in sealed canisters, and ephemeral silhouettes flickering with plasmic radiance. The ambient hum of translation devices reverberated softly. A subtle tap of clawed digits against the podium brought up the first holographic image, a swirling orb of pale blues and russet browns, cloaked in shifting cloud formations. The sight caused an appreciative murmur from parts of the audience most saw a serene, if unremarkable, planetary sphere. Distinguished attendees, began the speaker, voice echoing with a forced calm. We have discovered a planet that defies classification, a place that on initial inspection appears inviting. Yet extensive research reveals it to be one of the most perilous worlds we have ever surveyed. A ripple of skeptical amusement drifted through the crowd. A few watchers exchanged bemused glances or performed species-specific gestures akin to shrugs. Laughter is understandable, the speaker continued, shifting tone. We're all familiar with extreme environments, places pelted by acid rains, or worlds where gravity crushes anything beyond microbial life. But I assure you this planet is in a category of its own. Behind them, the hologram zoomed in on what seemed to be a tranquil coastline. At first glance, these shorelines look restful, the presenter said. However, nearly 3/4 of the surface is covered by a corrosive fluid. Over time, it dissolves rock and metal. The life forms here not only survive in it, they rely on it for essential bodily functions. They label this fluid water, and to them it's as ordinary as breathing. A few coughs and shuffles suggested the audience's discomfort. That's only the beginning, the speaker pressed on. A clip showed towering waves surging onto land, sweeping aside vehicles and buildings. Driven by multiple orbital influences, the planet's oceans can generate waves that can pulverize bone and level cities. A hush fell as a short video depicted catastrophic floods. Stifled squeaks of alarm echoed from a row of aquatic-based observers who recoiled in horror. Nor is solid ground any relief, continued the speaker, transitioning slides. Below its crust flows molten rock. The crust itself is fragmented into enormous plates that drift on this molten layer, grinding into one another. The phenomenon produces quakes and thrusts mountains skyward. What you see as majestic peaks are actually a record of violent geological collisions. A staccato series of taps on the podium advanced the presentation to swirling storm clouds. Perhaps you assume the atmosphere might offer respite. Unfortunately, it's prone to chaotic convulsions. These clouds, suspended concentrations of the same corrosive water, can cluster into systems that unleash destructive storms. Twisters, thunderous discharges of plasma, showers of frozen shards capable of punching through metal plating. These are all routine occurrences in various regions. Tracking these weather events is a full-time, global enterprise among the local inhabitants. A montage of swirling cyclones flickered above the crowd, accompanied by an unsettling rumble piped through the speaker system. Several audience members sealed their environmental suits more tightly, some letting out high-frequency alarms. And that is merely the standard weather. "Look here," the presenter said, switching to an image of lava spewing vents. "The planet is dotted with hundreds of active volcanoes, gushing toxic gases and molten material. Oddly enough, population centers exist in the shadow of such volcanic sites by choice." Somebody let out a squealing sound from the top row. Another group valiantly attempted to maintain composure, adjusting the volume on their translators to dampen the horrifying details. "It would be alarming enough if that were the end of it," the speaker said gravely. "But the local biosphere is equally astounding. Life here evolved through relentless ecological pressure, every species locked in a ceaseless arms race of predation and survival. One can find minuscule entities that dismantle large corpses in a matter of hours. Flying insects deliver chemical stings, so painful they can kill in groups. Over millennia, these organisms have learned to weaponize every available resource." Several frames depicted various bizarre creatures, one that glowed in the dark, another that spat acid, and still another with an electrified appendage. A wave of anxious shifting rippled across the seating pods. And yet the presenter continued. "The apex species stands out as the greatest anomaly of all." A glowing silhouette popped up, rotating slowly. "By conventional logic, these beings shouldn't dominate. They have no built-in armor. Their skin is easily punctured. They're neither the fastest nor the strongest creatures around." The imagery changed to show groups of these sapients stalking enormous fauna. They developed a form of hunting by persistence, methodically following prey until it collapses from sheer exhaustion. Over time, they refined this approach, combining it with their unmatched ability to adapt in real time. New slides flicked into view diagrams of internal organs, muscle fibers, neuronal structures. Their bodies mend fractures that would cripple many species for life. Their physiology counters infection with alarming efficiency. Even losing significant blood volume doesn't guarantee their demise. They press on, guided by a strong sense of problem-solving and an uncanny knack for recognizing patterns. An uneasy hush blanketed the auditorium. "You might suppose," the speaker said, "that such resilience is the pinnacle of their danger. But it's only a fraction. These sapients form social attachments with astonishing breadth. They befriend other lifeforms, domesticating them not strictly for utility, but for companionship as well. Predators that once posed major threats have been integrated into their communities, selectively bred over generations." A flurry of astonished commentary erupted from listeners. The presenter silenced it with a gesture, continuing, "And where most species would push away or eliminate competition, they incorporate it. Their capacity to cultivate alliances is matched only by their ferocity in times of conflict. They wage battles over intangible concepts, ideologies, boundaries drawn on maps, and so forth. Yet amid these conflicts, they invent new technology at breakneck speed. An archive of images showed them forging metal, harnessing chemical explosions, and eventually escaping their own gravity well on controlled bursts of ignition. We once doubted these timelines were real, the speaker confessed, voice hushed. How could any civilization progress from basic tools to interplanetary flight so rapidly? We triple-checked the historical data. It's accurate. Eyes and ocular equivalents across the audience widened, taking in the next chart. Consider these geological extremes: cataclysmic upheavals, lethal storms, a dangerously reactive atmosphere. All serve as a crucible, forging a species that not only endures but emerges stronger. Their environment seems specifically tailored to cultivate unstoppable adaptability. A gallery of achievements now cycled overhead, structures built upon shifting sands, cities extending thousands of spans into the sky, entire coastal lines redesigned. They do not accommodate nature's constraints, they demolish and rebuild those constraints. Hills leveled, wetlands drained, entire ecosystems rearranged. Astoundingly, they accomplish this transformation in mere years, sometimes months. A heightened wave of stunned chatter bounced around the hall. The speaker pressed a button, and the next series of recordings featured recreation activities. These inhabitants don't just confront hazards, they savor them. Observe these amusements, devices that fling them at unsafe speeds, contraptions that drop them from towering heights for an adrenaline surge. They voluntarily scare themselves with fabricated terrors in a social setting. Clips of frenetic sporting events appeared next, showing intense physical contact, collisions, and various precarious feats. They reward feats of daring that skirt mortal danger. Their definition of entertainment embraces everything from ingesting painfully irritating chemicals classified as spices to competing for who can withstand the most discomfort. Disbelieving hums spread through the assembly. That's not all, the presenter continued, voice trembling. They stage elaborate duels, not to kill but to test skill. They design entire virtual worlds to mimic life-threatening scenarios, then spend hours immersed in them. They are simultaneously the most cooperative and most thrill-driven beings we've ever documented. A sweeping motion brought up a final data set, a dense web of statistics. Comparing this planet to others in our database, it consistently rates among the highest in geological unpredictability, volatile weather, biodiversity of hostile species, and capacity for catastrophic events, in nearly every category associated with lethal conditions. It ranks in the top fraction. Yet against all odds, these sapients refer to their home as calm or even boring at times. They cast their gaze outward, believing the cosmos holds far graver dangers. The hush grew denser still, pressing like a physical weight. They are convinced, said the speaker, that somewhere out there must exist creatures and worlds far more perilous than their own. They greet the wider galaxy with relief, under the assumption that they are finally encountering environments that will test them. The next slide showed transcripts of interactions with these beings. When we warned them about cosmic radiation or volatile exoplanets, they smiled. When we admitted how rarely other worlds see such violent tectonic or atmospheric extremes, they seemed disappointed, as if craving a greater challenge. A few watchers attempted to whisper, only for their translator units to pick up the hushed queries and broadcast them more loudly, further highlighting the tension. The speaker took a shaking breath and carried on. Look at these settlement plans they've designed for worlds other than their own. Do you see the large windows, the open walkways? The built-in recreation areas? They have no intention of hiding from the harshness of alien terrains. They want to witness it firsthand, treating cosmic hazards like amusements to be conquered. A conceptual design displayed an off-world outpost built in the shadow of a steep canyon, complete with transparent observation domes. They appeared genuinely excited by the prospect of terraforming and colonizing. Harsh vacuum? They've invented suits letting them run, climb or jump with minimal restriction. Toxic atmospheres? They're exploring chemical filtration systems so they might breathe and build. One of the advisors, stationed behind the main podium, interjected in a trembling voice. We must categorize this planet differently. Our current rating systems were not prepared for this. It's not just another dangerous world, it's effectively a training ground that refined this species' tenacity. Heads around the room bobbed in agreement, though a few watchers stared in silent horror at the data. At last, the assembly's efficient broadcast directive commenced with the vote to establish a new classification. A hush, then a moment of flickering lights as each delegate registered a decision. Unanimous. A weighted atmosphere of finality settled as the efficient's voice echoed by consensus. We designate this planet as a newly identified top-tier danger zone. All first contact protocols are hereby suspended, pending an overhaul to address the sheer unpredictability of its apex inhabitants. The words had scarcely rung out when a door slid open, and strolled a representative from that very planet. Every occupant in the hall reflexively pulled back, pods and exosuits humming as emergency thrusters tried to create distance. The newcomer smiled apologetically. "Sorry for the delay. There was a slight mechanical issue with my transport. Had to improvise a landing approach. You know how it goes, their clothing was scuffed with faint traces of soot and scorch marks. A telling sign they had encountered a near catastrophe not minutes ago." Toting a satchel of containers, the visitor marched toward the stage. "Anyway, I hope I'm not too late. I've been analyzing some microorganisms we found near our planet's volcanic ridges. Thought the council might like to see how they process minerals." They lifted a sample canister, tapping it confidently. "Completely safe, as long as you're not, made of certain metals. Anyone interested in taking a closer look?" Alarm klaxons blared. Several delegates clamored for the nearest side exits, some hollering to open emergency egress tunnels. The visitor halted, looking genuinely puzzled. "Is everything all right? We could always meet another time. There's a new cafe downstairs that uses open flames to brew beverages. It's pretty spectacular." All around, the galaxy's most esteemed scholars and officials hurriedly activated evacuation procedures, jostling to leave the chamber. Hundreds of seats clattered as they retracted for emergency clearance. The only one not fleeing was the planet's representative, who looked around in confusion. "Have I done something to offend?" the newcomer asked politely, stepping aside to avoid a stampede of delegates in pressurized suits. The last thing the visitor saw before the stage lights dimmed was the ocean of panicked faces stampeding for the door, leaving them alone at the podium, holding a container of curious samples and wearing an utterly baffled expression. "Was it something I said?"